Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Chromis Pharma's third presentation of today. This one is about COVID-19, which is a subject that I'm pretty sure everyone's sick of talking about, but we have hopefully some good news about it, and that's important to share. So the title is Risk Management in 2021. COVID-19 is already not COVID-20, it's 2021. So we want to talk about the lessons we've learned from our experience with COVID-19, not just from our own perspective how it affects our company, but also from having run quite a few studies in the disease. So my background briefly, and we'll keep it very brief because I'm not the important topic here, but I have, I'm proud to say, more than 30 years in the biopharmaceutical industry, about half that time as a contract manufacturer of biologics, mostly monoclonal antibodies. Actually, I think my company manufactured more different monoclonal antibody cell lines than any other manufacturer in the world. For the second half of my biopharma career, I've been on the CRO side, and I really have enjoyed that much more actually than manufacturing, because it's as a CRO, you get to see really a lot more about the reason that we do what we do, which is the patient. And while we don't interact directly with our patients very much, we get to see the data about how well they're doing, and that's very exciting. So I'm based in the US. I've always been based in the US, but I've worked with global companies and in global clinical research regions for my entire career in the clinic, and also served clients all over the world. And also my little best kept secret is that I started life as a CPA with Ernst & Young, and so I have some financial background that's been very helpful in kind of sorting my way through the minefield of the whole clinical manufacturing and research space. So let me move on. Whoop, backwards. Today's session, just briefly, I want to talk about what we've learned from the pandemic, Chromis Pharma, and some of it's very subjective. I don't have a lot of data to present because there frankly isn't a lot of data except about caseloads and daily and almost by the minute. But I want to just talk about our general impressions of what the pandemic has taught us, what to do and not do, how it has actually benefited us in some ways. It's a horrific way to benefit, but it has actually. So we're going to spend some time on that. And I figured the best way to talk about the pandemic and bring it into perspective is to do it with a timeline. So hopefully, using this timeline, we're going to walk through this past almost year and a half now and discuss the challenges and what we came away with, and most importantly, what the positives are that we're taking into 2021 and beyond to use in a constructive way to make the whole field of clinical research better, easier, more optimal, and more effective. So that's our topic today, and we'll get right to it. So here's my timeline. Starting in February 2020, which is already after COVID-19, I guess it started to spread in January, maybe even late December, but we became aware of it all over the world in February. It began to spread, I think, probably post the Chinese New Year, and continued to spread throughout the globe until, I'll never forget this, because the lockdowns, at least in the US, started right around mid-March, because I was making plans to celebrate, being Irish, actually, by Irish American, I was going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and that's when the lockdown happened, right? The day before St. Pat's Day over here in the US. And so we're going to talk about what happened with the lockdowns and what it taught us. We're going to walk right through the summer, where it wasn't as much about panic as it was about people and danger. So the lockdowns were about people, right? And the appropriate priority. But as we got into the summer, we started talking about, okay, well, people are safe now, they're sheltering at home and wearing masks and so forth. But what do we do about our business? Because our business, it can't wear a mask. It's got to, survive on its own. Then by early fall, I think despite the fact that we'd still had caseloads in the summer, even though a lot of folks said, yeah, it's going to go away in the summer. By fall, I do remember that we were already starting about remediation efforts to not just to keep our studies running, but to actually try to bring them back into the budget and timeline that we expected in the beginning before COVID hit. But then by late fall, caseloads were way up again. The vaccines weren't out yet, but they were promised, and there was talk about another wave, lots of waves, I guess 3 waves by then, and even talk about another strain of the virus and the ensuing panic around that. So then December comes, and we do have 2 vaccines approved, and more on the way, of course, and we were all very happy, I think, to say goodbye to 2020. But as we enter into 2021, I think it's very important that we step back, take stock, and realize all the things that we did learn and did actually do right. And by we, I don't mean just Chromos Pharma. I mean we, the citizens of this globe, the things that we did very well to cope with this pandemic, and maybe some things we didn't do so well, and take into 2021 the good things, right? The things that we did well, the things that we learned how to do a lot better because of being forced by COVID. And, at the end of the day, you can't deny that aside from techniques and procedures and optimization methodologies that we have developed during COVID, there are a plethora of good drugs out there that are being developed for COVID that are also going to be developed for other indications that involve inflammation, and indications that, are similar to COVID in the way it affects people, and especially elderly people. So I think that this is the good news. Hopefully this will be the good news COVID talk, and gosh knows we need some more good news, I think. So what I'm going to do is walk down, like I said, through the timeline step by step. And let's start with the lockdown. I remember, and I'm sure everybody, it's like, where were you when, this or that happened? We all remember where we were and what we were doing when COVID started to become a real threat, right? So the first things we did, I know the first things everyone did were to secure the health and safety of people. And in the clinical research space, of course, people means our employees, our colleagues and collaborators, and most especially our patients in the clinic. So there was some great guidance out from both FDA and EMA and other regulatory bodies that were extremely helpful in helping to ensure safety. Regional guidance that called for lockdowns, called for sheltering in place. Companies did their best to provide more PPE, which was really needed at the time. But what we also did as a corporation, and I think most companies did this, is we took a look at our risk management plan, and it was completely inadequate, obviously, for the pandemic. We talk about losing power, we talk about the nuclear war, we talk about all these horrible force majeure issues, but the pandemic was certainly not a huge part of our risk management plan. But one thing I can promise you is that through this past year, we probably had 12 versions or 12 reversions of our risk management plan, because obviously the virus, it ebbed and it flowed, and things got better and worse. And of course, everyone who's working across multiple geographies had to tailor their management plans for risk around the geographies, because many of them were quite different. You talk to someone in Australia, and their experience with COVID is radically different and radically happier than most of the rest of us. So these are things we learned. We also, every study has a, a, a rhythm that flows in communication, a weekly project meeting, a global or monthly global meeting with vendors, and we go on this way. Well, when COVID hit, we were having daily meetings with our staff, daily meetings with our sponsors, and at least the larger ones who were running multiple sites across multiple venues. And communication became, unbelievably important. And we'll call it communication to the nth power, right? And of course, we didn't have budget for these meetings, but it didn't matter because we had to have them. We had to adapt to new platforms for meetings. There was no face-to-face. It was Zoom, it was Skype, Teams, WhatsApp, however. And many of us, including myself, probably more than anybody in my company, struggled with adapting to these platforms so that we could, initially we had to have a meeting with 15 people and 5 of them couldn't connect. And so I'm sure we all went through the trials and tribulations of just the technology and merging it and getting familiar with it. So another thing that we learned, and I learned this in filing the first IND under the COVID gateway for FDA, not the first, but our first, certainly, that, boy, they can move fast. FDA can really move fast. We put out an inquiry on late afternoon. We had an answer back the next morning, which is phenomenal. So we learned they can move fast. They learned they can move fast, and that's a huge benefit to all of us. We also learned that we can work from home, and we can actually be quite effective working from home. I used to believe it was not possible. Too many distractions. There's no substitute for teams being in the office together, having their meetings or having their hallway conversations, and it's synergistic, it's helpful. But I think we learned that we can kind of do that at home, from home, with our Teams meetings, with our pictures. We're putting our videos in there so that people don't forget what we look like. Although some of the ladies said, well, men too, I guess, said, I'm gaining COVID weight because I'm sitting around all the time. They want to show their videos. So, but we work through that. So, and the last thing I want to say about the lockdown itself was, these are the takeaways from it. I think the biggest one for me, and I've written risk management plans in my life. I have, back in my accounting days, disaster plans, you name it. This is the first time I really had to do it from scratch with something I wasn't really sure how to do. Got a lot of help from a lot of smart people. Found out we had some stars in our company that we didn't even know about yet. But the darn thing really worked. And as a prior accountant and even as a clinical research person, I've always viewed risk management plans as sort of, oh, you have to have them, but we never really use them. But I'm telling you what, my eyes have been opened, and my opinion of risk management plans is a lot higher now than it was a year ago, and we have a great one now, and it's we're going to keep it very updated, which certainly COVID requires us to do, because it morphs and it changes and it ebbs and it flows. So following along the timeline, by the time we got to summer, we realized that COVID was still around, even though a lot of experts had said, when the weather warms up around the world, it's gonna kind of die down. Well, I live in Florida, and it didn't go anywhere. It did not die down in Florida at all. In fact, we've been one of the hot spots. So that turned out not to be true, and it was disappointing. But by that time, we were kind of over that. We were, okay, well, we've secured our people. We figured out how to keep our clinical trials running, protect our patients, protect our site staff. And so that was sort of like, okay, the big push on that is it's stable now. We're good. Now what do we do about our business? So the next step is, of course, as we said earlier, how do we secure our business and make sure that we don't, lose so much money that we can't, continue to operate the way we have always operated. We certainly didn't want to lay anyone off because there were plenty of layoffs around the world, and we didn't want to lay off anyone. Jobs are critical, and they're scarce. So these were our concerns, and we were very lucky in this regard because we kept our trials running. We were paid just as well, or in some cases better, by our sponsors for adapting alternative methods of keeping their studies running, and even keeping their studies recruiting, and even closing out remotely, and even starting some new trials remotely, which was interesting, challenging, and actually doable. So that went pretty well for us. And then we also began to be, I would say, inundated with requests for studies in COVID-19 itself. And so we actually did much better than we thought we would through the pandemic. Financially, we ran a lot of studies quickly for COVID, got them approved and got them running quickly. It helped us financially, but it also helped us spiritually, I think emotionally, that we knew we always love what we do because we think we're doing good, and we believe that strongly. But running COVID trials for people when people were dying from being intubated and on respirators, and we ran a bunch of studies in very severe COVID and people who were intubated and so forth. And that was a really good feeling. I think we felt we were not being idle at home. We were contributing in a very positive way. And I also noticed that people got nicer. I just think everybody got nicer because we all realized we all had challenges, and we're all doing the best we can. And honestly, instead of being remote and feeling very distant, when we were able to get together, even in a supermarket, and I noticed that even though the supermarkets were rationing how many people could get in at a time and so forth, there's the invariable cart bump, or people were saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, excuse me," and wow, it made me feel really good that humanity was coming together and bonding in a very positive way. So by fall, we started talking about remediation. We're thinking, well, we're managing pretty well. Why don't we look at studies that might be slipping behind their timelines, or other potential clients who might be in real trouble with enrollment, and we'll sort of, get in the business of study remediation. We'll help. So if you get off your timeline, we'll show you how to put it back together. So we put together a webinar in the fall, and I'm going to share some of the slides from that webinar with you because it was very interesting, both in terms of what our thinking was at the time about, oh, well, this will be over soon, and then we'll bring everybody back on their timelines and we'll remediate. Interesting, because that isn't exactly what happened. The virus didn't go away, and a lot of sponsors aren't really trying to remediate yet. They're trying to just, keep it together. And the other thing is that I guess we were overly optimistic that things could just start being remediated right away. But in any event, there will be remediation. There will be a bolus of studies that will need help in 2021. And I thought it would be worthwhile to share very quickly. I'm going to walk through these slides really quickly. But we took a case study of a multi-country large trial in psoriasis, which if it were oncology, you would say, yeah, well, we can keep it together easier because oncology patients, they're very ill. They need to be treated. Whereas psoriasis, of course, it's a horrible condition to have, but it's not so severe that psoriasis studies might not be able to just be put on hold for a while until things calm down. So the study was 600 patients and multiple countries, as I said. And here are the key specs. 600 patients. As you can see, we used 58 sites in 5 countries. Very well established Western countries, and we had a total study duration timeline of 25 months and change. This we call base case because this is the way it was bid, this is the way it was planned. But and so here's our budget represented in 100% of cost and 100% of timeline, 25 months. So this is where we wanted to end up with our initial projections, our initial bid. So COVID strikes right here about 8 months into the study, which according to the study timeline, if I go back, you'll see that 8 months in, we're already, robustly enrolling. We're right here. So then COVID hits, and then of course hysteria hits. But so this representation shows where COVID hits, and then the next representation I want to share is we then, after COVID hit, and we realized how many sites were going to stop enrolling, and actually some sites were even converted into COVID treatment centers. And we ended up, if we didn't do any remediation, just trucked right along with COVID delays, this study would end up taking 34, 33 months to complete, which probably is underestimated, and was going to cost 20% more than original. So that, of course, was not acceptable. So we thought, well, what would we do with this? What we would do is we would add, and the green bar here shows, like 40 more sites. We would add them in much less expensive and faster recruiting venues, such as our Eastern European venues, of course. And by doing that, we would bring the study timeline back very close to where it started. Now, is that realistic? Yeah, at the time we actually thought it was. In retrospect, because COVID has dragged on so long and because it hasn't really decided to go away yet, the remediation looked great, but again, at least virtually, it looked perfect. And 6 months from now, it may be an absolute correct assumption that we can double down and bring a lot of studies back on almost, not quite, but almost their original timelines. So this was our thinking in the fall. And then in late fall, one thing I learned is to stop saying in these unprecedented times, because by then we're almost a year in. These times are not unprecedented anymore. They're precedented. We're used to dealing with it. So even though vaccines were coming soon and promised, we didn't really see an end in sight, except that we were now sort of accustomed to working in a COVID world. And another expression I won't use is the new normal, because I don't think any of us want this to be a new normal. But what we do want is to take a quick peek at some of the really helpful things that we did to work through COVID, keep our studies stable, keep our patients safe, keep our employees and our vendors and our sites and site staff safe, and make sure that we don't forget these things, because these things can be used for many, many different, let's say, risk conditions that we assess, analyze, and determine that we need to mitigate. Among them are, we now have weekly caseload reporting by country at our weekly management meeting. And by management, I don't mean C-suite. I'm talking about everyone who manages a department of one or more than one person. So every week we have a meeting, we talk about COVID, we talk about the caseloads, we talk about status of shutdowns and status of sites opening, closing, and sites can be closed by law, by regulation, or just from PI to PI. They may want to just shut down and protect their people. That's their choice. Or they may be asked by the government to, to remove the research to another site and then convert 100% of their site to COVID treatment. So this became part of our routine, weekly update reporting. We also doubled down on our therapeutic trainings, our protocol trainings, deviation reporting, CAPA, and all those things that we we know and we train on, but we retrained and doubled down on training. Because one of the things that I personally was pushing really hard is, guys, we track protocol deviations, but you realize now that EMA and FDA are allowing us, or in fact, requesting that we track our protocol deviations by COVID-related versus not COVID-related. Not to say we don't categorize them and analyze and assess and report the same way we always did, but now we separate them into COVID-related, missed subject visit 3 through 6, COVID-related. Can we treat them at home? But anyway, so we have, I have to say, gotten a lot more diligent about our use of diligent tools and COVID-related, non-COVID-related protocol deviation reporting, which at the end of the day is going to be a good thing, because I believe the agencies are going to be a little more lenient on COVID-related deviations. We used remote monitoring, of course, as everyone did, and in-house monitoring and risk-based monitoring, which, I wrote a white paper on risk-based monitoring a year ago, but it had not come as crystal clear to me what it really means and how it really works until we had to do it in COVID. And now every study that we have, whether it's 50% SDV or 100% SDV, we're going to employ risk-based monitoring, which does not mean monitor, do less SDV and save money. That's not what it means. It means do more analysis and do more SDV of critical data points, but do more high-level analysis of outliers, for example, and inliers, which honestly are just as bad as outliers. If 6 patients in a row have the exact same assessments that are subjective by one evaluator, and they have the same ones as the next study visit and the next study, that's a problem, just as much as an outlier like a blood pressure reading of 30/20 would be an outlier. So we're more diligent with that and much more educated about risk-based monitoring and much more flexible about using vendors that can make study visits and allowing some study visits to happen at home, finding ways to deliver drug to patients, to do drug accountability remotely through, video tours and of the pharmacy. We're doing things that 2 years ago I would have been amazed that we would do, but we're doing them and they're working and they're accepted. So I think if I could say what so far good has come out of this year-to-date experience, let's say as of the end of 2020, we have learned how to assess, manage, and mitigate like never before. We have embraced fully, we've got like 100% compliance with our CTMS right now, and data entered into it, almost in real time. We're embracing and using our e-tools fully and for what they were designed for, to keep us on top of everything. It became much more important during COVID. So the takeaway here is, even though it was a horrific experience and it still continues to be horrific and tragic for many, many families, there is good that can come out of it. And we are learning so much about how to manage clinical research in a better way, an optimized way, a more patient-centric way, without jeopardizing data quality and data integrity. And I think this is huge, a huge learning, because I know a lot of people who are quick to criticize pharmaceutical industry in general, and certainly clinical research organizations are part of that, for being what we call late adopters. We're risk averse, we don't want to adopt new ways, we don't like to change, even though we have change management and control, we don't like change. But when you think about it, our clients, the pharma companies, the drug developers, they are taking more risk than most industries, honestly. So why on earth would we want them, or would they even entertain the concept of adding the risk of a CRO that doesn't do their job correctly, um, sites that are enrolling too many to spend a lot of time on enough time and give enough oversight? We have to make sure that doesn't happen. We have to make sure that our sponsors are not asked to incur more risk than they already have, which is terrific and huge. And this is why, to be a preferred provider, we have to do exactly what we're asked to do. And we have to do it well and keep our sponsors clean as a whistle. And look, we can't guarantee that their data, their drug will pass, but we have to guarantee that it won't fail because of anything that we did wrong. And that's got to be our commitment. And I do believe the lessons we've learned this year will enable us to do a much better job of that. I'm wrapping up now, I promise. This is an example of our weekly COVID reporting for every country that we work in, and as we expect this from our country heads and our executives. I wanted to put a bunch more examples in here of other reports that we're using, but I kind of ran out of time. I may pack them in there sometime during the week so that I can circulate the presentation and show some of the examples, and there are dozens. But just in closing, and in the interest of time, a couple points to remember is that, even though COVID's not unprecedented anymore, it's kind of business as usual, but business as we know it's still a ways off. And I said it's far away, if ever, and the if ever means not that COVID won't go away. It will. We'll conquer it, but things may change. We may do business quite differently in the future to what we do now. And I believe that if that happens, it's going to be all to the good. It's going to be much better, optimized, efficient. We're going to finally achieve some of the data, the patient centricity, the big data promises, AI, and some of these things that we've given a lot of lip service to the past years. This pandemic has enabled us to leap that chasm and start adopting and embracing a lot of these new technologies that really became necessary during COVID. So some other takeaways: going remote and virtual where possible, and that's not going to go away. Even in new study designs, even when COVID goes away, we may choose to do more things remotely. It might make a lot of sense, especially in a patient-centric environment. And finally, if there were one word I would say to everyone, CROs and sponsors who are hiring the CROs and managing them, is choose a CRO who is flexible and agile, because this is all required very, very fast action and very, very smart management. So maintain your flexibility and be prepared to act. And then finally, it's not really a risk management thing at all, but I do want to also give mention to the fact that the speed with which regulatory agencies have worked, and I don't just mean FDA and EMA, I mean all of them, ministries of health across Central Eastern Europe, Brazil has done an amazing job of getting COVID studies underway and approved and underway, vaccine studies. This has been an amazing leap forward for the industry, and we should be very proud of it. And as a result of this leap forward, we're going to see a lot of new technologies coming out of COVID that are not just for COVID, but are for comorbidities of the elderly, lung disorders, cardiac. We're going to see a lot of good medicine coming out of the COVID ordeal. And even the emergency use authorization process is going to enable sponsors to have data around drugs that would have taken them years and cost tens of millions to get in the past. And so I'm very excited about what 2021 will offer. And I think that net, as horrific as COVID was, we have to focus on the positive outcomes. Thank you very much. We'll have some Q&A sessions after this. Thank you.